the foreman crew of the Shuttle Challenger in June 1982 during a turnover ceremony at Rockwell International's final assembly site in Palmdale, Calif. From left are Dr. Story Musgrave, the pilot, Carol J. Bobko, the mission specialist, Donald H. Peterson, and the commander, Paul J. Weitz, who died on Monday. The man at the right is unidentified. Doug Pazak, Associated Press. Paul J. Weitz, an astronaut who was in the first crew to board the Skylab space station and 10 years later commanded the initial flight of the Space Shuttle Challenger, died on Monday in Flagstaff, Arizona. He was 85. His death was announced by NASA. No cause was given. Mr. Weitz was one of 3 astronauts in the first manned Skylab mission, in 1973. That crew established what was then a duration record for a single mission, 672 hours 49 minutes. 10 years later, in April 1983, he was back in space in command of the Challenger, the second shuttlecraft to go into orbit. Columbia had carried the first shuttle astronauts into space in 1981. Challenger ultimately flew 9 successful missions, but on its 10th, in January 1986, it exploded moments after launch, killing the 7 astronauts on board. After the disaster, Mr. Weitz became part of the NASA management team that spent months dissecting what went wrong and identifying problems within the agency that affected safety. Paul Joseph Weitz was born on July 25, 1932, in Erie, Pennsylvania. His father, Peter, was the son of Hungarian immigrants. His mother was the former Violet Pearl McClymont. He graduated from high school in Harbor Creek, PA. While earning a degree in aeronautical engineering at Pennsylvania State University, he was commissioned an ensign in the Reserve Officers Training Corps, and in 1964 he received a master's degree at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, Calif. He was stationed in Jacksonville, Florida, when, on a training flight, the plane he was in clipped wings with another plane. The other plane landed safely, but he and his instructor had to bail out. It wasn't uncomfortable except that I went through the top of a Florida pine tree, he said. Mr. Weitz, known by the nickname PJ, served as a pilot in the Navy in Vietnam before being selected by NASA for the Astronaut Corps in 1966. He was the pilot on the 1973 mission to the Skylab space station, working under Commander Charles Conrad Jr., with Joseph P. Kerwin rounding out the crew. Skylab, the first American space station, had been sent up on May 14, and the 3 men were to blast off the next day and board it. But a heat shield designed to protect the lab from the sun was damaged during launch, so the crew waited while NASA engineers devised a makeshift repair for them to implement. Ellen Ochoa, director of the Johnson Space Center, said in a statement, PJ's role on the first Skylab mission helped save NASA's first space station. NASA 2 other manned missions visited the station later that year, conducting experiments involving solar observation, the effects of microgravity on humans, and much more. After the last astronauts left in February 1974, Skylab continued to orbit, until 1979, when it took a much-publicized but ultimately harmless dive back to Earth, disintegrating as it re-entered the atmosphere. Mr. Weitz's wife, the former Suzanne Berry, whom he had married in 1956, was not surprised at the fix-it abilities he demonstrated on the Skylab mission. "He's very handy around the house," she told the New York Times in an interview in June 1973. Shortly before he blasted off for the space station, she said, he was on the roof replacing shingles. Mr. Weitz returned to the military after that flight, and retired in 1976. But he returned to NASA as the Space Shuttle era began. On April 4, 1983, Mr. Weitz led a crew of 4 that took Challenger on its maiden voyage, landing it successfully at Edwards Air Force Base in California on April 9. After the ship exploded almost 3 years later, the shuttle program was suspended while NASA investigated the cause and did a lot of soul-searching about its processes and structure. Mr. Weitz was among several idle astronauts given management responsibilities. He became a deputy director of the Johnson Space Center, retiring from that post in 1994. One concern after the Challenger explosion was that NASA had been undertaking too many flights too quickly. Mr. Weitz acknowledged that problem in an interview on the CBS News program Face the Nation in 1986. "In the past I firmly believe that the system has come to succumb, probably subconsciously, to the pressures of schedule," he said. "And I think one of the things we ought to see that we don't do again in the future is set ourselves up where we are susceptible to such pressures." Suzanne Weitz died last year. Mr. Weitz's survivors include a daughter, Cindy DeFranco, a son, Matt, and a sister, Evelyn Richards. During his 2 missions, Mr. Weitz spent 33 days in space, always with a touch of awe. In a 1983 interview with The Times, he recalled that during his Skylab stay, he never tired of looking at the view of Earth. "Nearly all my time was spent at the window," he said.